We're back on the BAT podcast with a very special guest today. Today we have Greg Miller from Salt Lake City, Utah. He is one of the founders of the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum, which is right there in Salt Lake and houses a super interesting collection of all sorts of unusual Toyota Land Cruisers, all the way back to the early history up to modern day, and many with really interesting stories, and runs a really neat operation. We want to talk about it today. Greg, welcome.
Thanks, Randy. Always great to be with you.
We're excited to chat a little bit about the museum. Some people know about it. It's a little inside baseball, like Land Cruiser people know about it, but some other people don't know about it. I discovered it a number of years ago, but still actually haven't visited. You guys have a cool website that shows some things that are going on there that I have followed closely. But I'm excited that my first visit is going to be here in a couple of weeks for an event you're having once a year now called Cruiser Fest, which is right in my wheelhouse. But tell us first off just about the museum and why it's there and kind of why you started it.
Well, it's a story I love to tell. Land Cruisers are near and dear to my heart, and I guess it probably started with my dad. His association with Toyota began clear back in 1968 and continued through the time of his death and even through today. We've got several Toyota and Lexus stores in our family business portfolio today, but my first recollection of a Land Cruiser was back in I would say 1970. I was probably 4 or 5 years old. And I remember going to work with my dad once when he was a parts manager at Stevenson Toyota in Lakewood, Colorado. And I got bored watching him work, so I wandered off out into the back lot. And I can still remember seeing this really cool powder blue Jeep looking thing. And I went up and tugged on the door handle and it opened. And so I climbed up in there, and I can still sense that intoxicating combination of rust and oil and dust and naugahyde, and it all kind of comes together in that beautiful blend. And I climbed up in there and pretended like I was driving it, and that was probably the moment it all started for me. And then since then, Land Cruisers have just been a huge part of my life. When my dad, as he moved through the ranks in the Stevenson organization, we would take our family vacations in FJ55s, often winding up in Canyonlands down in southern Utah. We'd also drive up to Banff and Lake Louise. And it's laughable now. I mean, my parents would get, have their kids taken away for, the car had 5 seatbelts, and there were 2 adults and 5 kids. And so 2 of us would take turns riding in the cargo bay with the old metal Coleman cooler and an apple box full of cheese and crackers. And we would just log the miles at 55 miles an hour, and so then when on my 16th birthday, I remember waking up early and going in my mom and dad's bedroom and grabbing the keys to the FJ60 that my mom had as a demo and shaking them. Come on, Mom, wake up! We got to go get my driver's license test. And so, I mean, just hundreds and hundreds of memories. And so, as far as the museum goes, this was probably in about 2011. I had maybe a dozen Land Cruisers. I just had started buying cool Land Cruisers that I saw with no particular objective or theme to the acquisitions other than just no discipline and seeing a cool one and buying it. And so I was preparing for this global expedition. Me and my friend Scott Brady from Overland Journal and Expedition Portal had connected on this idea to drive the same Land Cruiser on all 7 continents. And so as that plan developed, we found ourselves in Toyota City in Japan, outside of Nagoya, to take delivery of the 2 VDJ78 Land Cruisers that we would ultimately drive around the world. One made it on 6 continents, one made it on all 7. The one that only did 6, we chose not to fly it to Antarctica, but the other one did make it to Antarctica. And those cars, by the way, are on display at the museum as well. So anyway, Scott and I and my oldest son Oakley are in Toyota City to take delivery off the assembly line of these cars. And we scheduled a couple of extra days to go hit the other Toyota museums to see all these cool Land Cruisers that surely were on display over there. And to our surprise, after hitting 3 Toyota-owned museums, we saw 0 Land Cruisers on display. They had a chassis of one that showed the drivetrain, but there were no completed vehicles. And I didn't know how to process that. I knew enough about Toyota's, about Land Cruiser's history or role in the history of Toyota, I should say, where as they became a global company, one of their growth strategies was to send Land Cruiser into the new market first and establish this reputation for legendary quality, durability, reliability, dependability, and reliability. And then once they got that toehold, they bring in the Toyopet and the Corona and the Crown and other things. And so it just was such an important part in their history. I was surprised that there wasn't more space, so to speak, given to these Land Cruisers in their museum. So anyway, I got home and I started thinking about it. And me and another friend, Kurt Williams, who's kind of a legend in the Land Cruiser community, were driving to a small town in the middle of Wyoming one night to pick up a soft top FJ70 or BJ70 rather, that I had purchased from a gentleman up there. And as we were driving up there, Kurt had a computer and I said, hey, I got an idea I want to run by you. So he brought his laptop, and on the drive from Salt Lake up into Wyoming, we started kind of sketching out what the museum would look like if we were to put it together. And I remember that night we decided that one of our objectives would be to acquire one of every OEM model of Land Cruiser that was ever available. And then subsequent to that night, we realized that there was a rabbit hole worth of options if you look at the commercial applications, and then another category of historically significant Land Cruisers that is less prolific than the commercial applications, but still a rabbit hole nonetheless. So here we are. That would have been in, like I said, probably 12 that I did that drive into Wyoming with Kurt. So we're here 10 years later, and we've acquired most of the OEM models. There's 3 late model JDM versions that we have not acquired yet for political reasons, which I can get into if you want. But then the really hard stuff to find, I need an FJ35, I need an FJ38, and like the unicorn among unicorns would be an AK-10, which, depending on which research you read, there are rumored to have ever been 4 or 6 or 10 produced back in around 1950, and everybody seems to think that they've all been crushed, and there's no evidence to the contrary. So I may never get an AK-10, but so we're pretty close on the OEM lineup, and then there's still a number of commercial application vehicles that I'd like to get, like an African game viewer, for example. But we've got a lot of cool ones. We have a truck that serviced the radio and television network in the hills of Japan. We have an FJ56 tow truck. We've got an ambulance. We've got some Army vehicles and military vehicles, I should say. And so there's a lot of really neat variations of those. So as the museum sits now, we've got probably a little over 100 different models there. Everything from a Toyota Jeep 1953 BJT Toyota Jeep to a 2021 Heritage Edition US spec Land Cruiser 200 series, and pretty much everything in between.
Unbelievable. Well, there's a lot of models in there I want to jump on. I do want to jump on the political thing, but I mean, back before what you were saying about Japan, so you guys were over there looking for museums, looking for cruisers in museums. Did you pose the question to folks that were letting you in these places? Like, where are they? Like were they just didn't think of it as worth being restored or being in a museum, or were you in the wrong place, or like what was the deal? Why didn't they have cruisers?
We did pose the question, and it was They had in one museum, in fairness, one was a museum that was a tribute to the early days of Toyota that focused on the looms. Many of your listeners probably know that Toyota was actually founded as a loom or weaving company, and later evolved to a transportation company. And so the two of them were specifically automotive, and they had 2000 GTs and Centuries and high ace vans and all kinds of cool stuff, but they just didn't have a Land Cruiser. And I don't know if it was just timing or bad timing on our part, or they didn't have them in the rotation, or what it was. Nobody was able to really give us a solid answer on that.
Super interesting. Well, some of those models that you reference are near and dear, and some people know them, but yeah, you definitely have some obscure stuff. What's the vehicle total, first off, in the museum? How many rigs you got there?
Somewhere between 100 and 110.
Oh man, unbelievable. That's cool. I'd love to see. I don't know that I've ever seen that many cruisers in one place. But so you got that many of them, and you're listing off. So just a sort of naive question. I love cruisers. I've been around cruisers as long as I can remember, but I don't have any idea what an AK-10 is. Can you tell people what those four mythical dinosaurs are that may no longer roam the earth?
Yeah, well, the AK-10 was a prototype that that Toyota actually was working on in an attempt to try to fill some requests they'd had for some military vehicles. And I think they were, if you Google AK-10, you'll see it's a really crude, almost look like an old farm tractor. And I think they would just build one, they would test it, and once they identified what the weaknesses were in it, they would improve it for the second one. And then I'm told they would crush the first one and just keep going with that process. And again, it's unclear how many survive, if any, and what their fate might have been. So that is the AK-10. It actually resembles the BJT a little bit. The Toyota, the Jeep was, I think from 51 to 54, they made that one. And if you Google both of those, you can see there is a bit of a resemblance. And as primitive as the BJT looks, it's still quite a refinement from the AK-10.
Interesting. Super cool. Well, I hope some people will Google that stuff. I definitely will. And we'll look at some of the stuff at the museum as well. But so then what is the actual earliest chassis or vehicle that you have in the collection of 100 plus?
We have a 1953 BJT. It's actually not called a Land Cruiser. It's called a Toyota Jeep. And as the story goes, in about 56 or 57, Toyota had been gearing up, producing. By then, they'd probably produced several hundred Toyota Jeeps. And then Willys called and said, "Hey, that thing you guys are building that you're calling a Jeep, you can't call it. Our thing is a Jeep. You can't call it that." And so shortly thereafter, they came up with the name Land Cruiser. And I think globally, 57 was probably the first year for Land Cruisers. In the US, I believe it was 1958 was the first year.
Fantastic. Well, you know so much. You are a catalog of this sort of information, and we really appreciate you sharing it. BAT, as you've seen, and you and I have talked about, has always sort of embraced cruisers of all flavors, just because that's sort of always been something that's a favorite of mine. My first car was a 74 FJ40. And so hunting cruiser classifieds has always been a thing for me. It sounds like if you're taking road trips to Wyoming, and you mentioned no discipline in purchasing, we have a little bit of overlap in our pastimes.
Well, let me tell you, Randy, your bring a trailer thing has made the no discipline thing run rampant. It's I don't know how many Land Cruisers I bought on bring a trailer, but it's probably a good thing my wife doesn't know either.
Well, anyhow, we are presenting some of the interesting ones, and that, I mean, BAT kind of started like that, of just sort of turning over rocks and finding interesting stuff. And yeah, if I would find a JDM FJ56 with ambulance doors, like in New Hampshire or something, that would surely make the grade. And for better or worse, we would put some eyeballs on it, right? Because those sort of things were buried on the internet all over the place. And it's just really fun surfacing those and talking about them and getting people excited about them. And now, as you know, a cruiser can cost anything from $4,000 to $400,000, depending on where you put your priorities.
Yeah. It's a remarkable thing you've created with the Bring a Trailer website. I spent too much time on it this morning, as a matter of fact, and luckily I got outbid, luckily or unluckily. But I love what you've done, and I think for me, aside from the ease of use and the super intuitive navigation, the thing that I value most about it is just the database that it becomes, a repository to help help ascertain market values and on every car, any car that's got any collectability whatsoever, there's a database for it. And that, I think, is a great resource for collectors of all types of cars. So thanks for putting that together.
Oh, that's cool to hear. Yeah, I like that. And I like being able to refer to that, after you've looked at 2,000 listings for Datsun 510s. It's kind of nice to have them all in one place instead of forgetting where all your screenshots and bookmarks were. So anyway, I use it for that too. And I think a lot of people do. So that's flattering for us to hear from a sophisticated guy such as yourself that you're using it in that way. But that's helpful and great for the rest of the community to hear. I would say, well, since you mentioned it and I'm dancing around it a little bit, I want to hear why you don't have those 3 models. You mentioned you don't have 3 for maybe some sort of background political reasons. I don't know what you're allowed to share or what you're not, but can you shed some light on that for us?
Yeah, and it's I'd be happy to. As you'd imagine, many of the vehicles in the museum are non-US spec and therefore not legal for use on US highways. And so the way we've dealt with that is we have developed relationships with NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration, and the EPA, the 2 agencies that need to sign off on importation of non-US spec vehicles. And going back to the Obama administration, when the majority of our applications were approved, we kind of hit a cadence. We had some good contacts within those departments. We understood the application process and where the potential snags were and so on. And we got, I would say, dozens of cars approved to bring in for show and display purposes. And then, and this is kind of what I've stitched together, just a few data points based on calls I've made to people who know the DC scene as well as anybody that I know. And we kind of, so there were the JDM models, late models. We needed a 120 or 121, a 125, a 150 or 151, and a 155. They're ubiquitous in Japan, and they're pretty bland, pretty boring cars, but they're kind of like Camrys are here in America. And so I actually bought one, and I don't remember which one of those 4 models it was, but I bought it through the guy that had sold me a lot of other JDM products, late model JDM products. And it was sitting in the yard, and we applied for all the permits and permissions that we needed to import it, and it was crickets, and we couldn't get a response. We couldn't get anybody to answer the phone or an email. So I called a friend who's pretty well connected in the DC scene, and this was during the Trump administration. And his response was, he just kind of laughed when I told him why I was calling. He said, "Well, Greg, it's a no-brainer if you think about it." He said, "President Trump hates big government, and so he's not doing anything to support a lot of those offices. And all the good people in those offices have either been promoted to other places where they're not going to answer your call, or they've gone to the private sector, or they've retired. And as those migrations have taken place, there hasn't been anybody coming in behind them. And so most of those departments are on skeleton crews now." And so then I had another attorney that I work with who was in DC, and while she was there, she had dinner with an attorney who had pretty firsthand knowledge of the goings on with my applications. And she was, my attorney was there, and she said it was a wonderful social dinner that she had with this gentleman. And then at the very end, she said, "Hey, by the way, would you happen to know anything about these applications that my client has submitted?" And she said the tone changed immediately, and she just said, "Look, you need to tell Greg to cool his jets. This isn't going to happen." And that was all. I mean, her instincts were, "Don't push it, just let it sit." And so that's what we've done. And as a result, I actually sold the car that I had in the yard over there and took a huge loss on it, because I know I paid too much for it. But so anyway, it's gone. And so there's probably, as I'm thinking about it, there's probably 4 models, not 3, that are those 4 late model JDMs that I need to get a version of into the museum. And maybe now that the Biden administration's been in place, as long as they have those agencies are restaffed, and I should probably make another run at it before I go buy those cars. But just based on the feedback that attorney friend of mine gave me, she thinks maybe best to wait as long as I can to let whatever dust settle that may have caused him concern. So that's kind of where we sit right now.
Oh man, I would say anybody who's imported cars resonates with you. There's a lot of those in our crowd as well, who have either dealt with the port or dealt with DC or dealt with some sort of agency, and it's on the desk of the person that retired. That's not the first time I've heard that story. So sorry, that's slowing things up for the museum. I do appreciate that the museum, at least formerly, got a little bit of a fast track for that, where it's somewhat for the public good of people seeing it. It's not just for somebody looking to win a drag race or whatever else with their Nissan Skyline. This is kind of a better justification for show and display.
The ironic thing about that is, as I've been digging into it, or when I was digging into it, what I learned was that the 25-year rule exists because of the auto industry. And, there's so many gray market cars coming into the U.S. that I don't know if it was the National Auto Dealers Association, it was probably them, but I'm not sure it was, that helped lobby to get this law passed. And so my own industry, the industry that feeds my kids and puts a roof over my head, is the one that is the biggest antagonist to rounding out the museum collection. It's kind of an ironic twist.
Yeah, that is an interesting one. Well, I don't know what it was like in Utah in the 80s, but in California in the 80s, people were importing every gray market thing up until 86 or 7, whenever it was, they shut it off. I mean, you'd see European stuff, and I geeked out on all that as a little kid, like identifying a gray imported car for its different taillights and all the illegal stuff on it and all that sort of thing. That was a whole cottage industry, and yeah, they clamped it down, probably for some good reason, but man, I always wanted to see less than 25-year-old supercars and stuff that I saw in German car magazines, and never got to see them until you take a trip over there for that reason.
It would be interesting to do. You could do a whole podcast on the legalities of that. There's so much misinformation floating around about, that people think that just because you can license and register a car in a given state, that it's legally imported, and they don't understand the difference between that and the actual legality of the importation process, and so on. And it would be interesting to have an expert on and just really break that down. I think there's a huge appetite for that. And, maybe that's something we could talk about on a later episode.
Yeah, absolutely. We take a pretty careful approach on that. The guy with his 3-year-old European spec BMW or whatever, trying to sell it out of Florida with a clean title. We've learned our lesson on a few of those and are very cautious on that sort of stuff. So it is handled differently by a whole bunch of different folks, but the BAT name of the game is to be very careful and thoughtful about how we do that. We don't want somebody to get stuck with a car like that. But interestingly, and there's a couple of people that have even commented, I think they may have even commented publicly, but they've reached out to us. BAT flies around inside the NHTSA office in DC, and a couple of them reached out to us and are like, "Oh yeah, I work for the government and I know the 25-year-old year rule pretty clearly because I enforce it, and we're happy to help." They actually were super cheerful and helpful, and we're like, we love BAT, and we love that it, surfaces if there's a problem that gets shut down, and they really like that we've booted a couple of cars that actually aren't legal and that sort of thing. So anyway, their eyes are sort of everywhere on the internet, I think, and that includes BAT. So we'll see, but that could be a future podcast. We may want to get your perspective on it.
Well, that's a really cool perspective. I was unaware that you guys had that connection, but now that I think about it, it makes a lot of sense. And that's probably just one more dimension of value that you're adding to your audience. Thanks for doing that.
We're trying to do that. So you want to have everybody paying attention. So back to the museum a little bit. So I don't know how many years ago, but you're trying to turn this into an annual thing, this Cruiser Fest, one day or weekend of sort of celebration of both the museum and the community that surrounds Land Cruisers. Tell me what the story is there and about the one coming up in a few weeks.
Yeah, so Cruiser Fest, as you said, I think this will be our 13th annual event. It'd be the 13th year we've held it. We like a lot of people, missed out on last year, but this is either our 12th or 13th year. It started as a small gathering back when the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum was out at the old Miller Motorsports Park. We had maybe 20 Land Cruisers show up, and it's grown into quite a neat event. And I like to think of it as an open house for the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum. We tried to build some date equity into it by hosting the event on the first Saturday after Labor Day for probably the last 10 years. And it's really neat. This year we're going to have a bunch of food trucks there. We're going to have a show and shine where anybody with a Land Cruiser can have it on display there throughout the day to just share it with all the other folks that are there. In 2019, when we held this event, we had a little over 400 people come through that day. Unless we have some kind of crazy flare up with COVID again, I'm hoping that we'll actually exceed that this year. The more, the merrier, as far as I'm concerned. And I love families to come. I love seeing young kids in the museum with their parents and just see that spark where they get that little sense of adventure. It plays right into I know I'm kind of wandering. Let me go sideways for just a second, back to the museum. The mission of the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum is to preserve and celebrate the history of the Toyota Land Cruiser and to inspire adventure. And so when I see kids there with their parents and I see them start planning, hey, I'm going to go home and dust off that FJ60 that I have a bunch of boxes stacked on in the garage, and I'm going to get it running. I'm going to take my kids camping. That is the biggest payday I get, because it involves Land Cruisers, it involves family, it involves outdoors, adventure. It's awesome. And so I hope that Cruiser Fest kind of results in that. It inspires people to get off the couch or leave the office early one week and just get out, be with their family, reconnect with what's important, and kind of level set in nature, hang out with their buddies, just do something for themselves and relax and enjoy it. So, we're going to have, in addition to the things that I mentioned with Cruiser Fest, we're going to have some big names, as you mentioned at the outset. You're going to be there to address the folks. I'm not sure if you're there at 1 or 1:30, but we're looking forward to hearing your message, and you've offered to take some Q&A, as I understand it. So I appreciate that. I'm sure that's going to be really well received. There'll also be some how-to demonstrations there from experts on various outdoor related activities. And then of course, there'll be tours of the museum. There's going to be more information at landcruiserhm.com. That's landcruiserhm.com, which is the website for the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum. Or folks could just Google Cruiser Fest, and I'm sure they'll find what they need to know there.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it's going to be a killer day. And there's also some news with the museum, which is that it's changed it up to a new facility. Is that right? Yes.
This will be our third facility in probably just under 10 years of the museum. And we had a really cool old facility, but we lucked into an even cooler facility. This one's exactly 12 blocks north of the old facility. The address is 476 West, 600 North in Salt Lake City. And the thing I love about this facility is, number one, it's about 20% bigger than our old facility, which will allow us a really neat room for presentations or small social gatherings. But the building was built in the 1930s as a foundry, and it's got probably 35-foot ceilings at the apex of the cupola, tons of clear story windows, tons of natural light, and all of that patina on the original iron columns and cross members and stuff is there. And I mean, the building itself sort of sets the tone for a great historical experience. And there's just lots of, like I say, patina and stains on the walls and texture to the walls from metal hitting it and so on. And then that is sort of juxtaposed against some of these really well done, polished, colorful vehicles that are just displayed across the new concrete floor. And it's just such an amazing feel. We just moved in last weekend, actually. And so I've been down there every day since. I just can't get enough of it. And I really hope that others feel the same way about it. I know I'm a little prejudiced, but hopefully, one thing I've learned about the museum is, as much fun as it is to curate and own or donate Land Cruisers to the foundation, it's way more fun to share them with other people who share the affinity.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, cool. Well, I'm excited to see that building and see the additional space that you all have, and all the guests that'll be there. I presume with hundreds of vehicles will be outside, so we'll see the sort of indoor outdoor feel of the event. So that sounds terrific. I mean, you say you've been down there every day, you're doing the move, you're doing all this stuff. I mean, you're a busy guy, you have all sorts of things going on at your fingertips, but how much time are you spending on this thing, man? Is this like your pet side project, or is this like where you're out spending all your time?
It's that's a funny question. I would hate to have you ask my assistant that question, because she just roll her eyes. But I've been very blessed in my career. I've had a pretty good run, and my most recent assignment in the family business, I filled the role of CEO for about 7 years, and then I owned a Toyota store in San Diego for a couple of years. And basically, since I sold the dealership in California, this has been my outlet for my energy, and it's kind of worn the people that work with me out, because I put a lot into it, and I've always got another idea. Hey, we got to make this happen. And I in my mind, whenever I walk in the building, I can hear them all saying, "Uh-oh, here comes Greg, duck, cover," But yeah, it's been a really enjoyable outlet, and I try to be there enough to support it and derive satisfaction from it. But it's important to me to let the people who run the museum or are involved with it day to day, such as Dan Busey and Jules Cho and Toby, my assistant, Toby Warner, who's awesome, have a little autonomy so that they can do their thing and enjoy it, and not just feel like it's that they're working on my to-do list all the time. And I like to think that we meet that standard with them.
That's great. Do you have any sort of museums that sort of spark inspiration for you, something that you're trying to maybe pattern it after, or others that you've been to that really kind of set it off and made you want to do something like this?
I try to plagiarize an idea or two from every museum I go to. The two that are coming to mind this moment are the Shelby American Collection in Boulder, Colorado. It's a phenomenal museum that houses amazing history from the 60s, with Carroll Shelby and Ken Miles and the whole crew. You can just really feel their personalities when you're in there. And that one is very similar in feel and in presentation to the Land Cruiser Heritage Museum. And then, in my opinion, probably the very top of the totem pole would be the Peterson Automotive Museum in LA. That place is absolutely phenomenal. And of course, the cars they have on display, many of them are probably literally priceless. But the history there and the presentation and it's just amazing. So those are two that have provided inspiration to me for sure.
That's cool. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, there's a bunch of museums all over the place, and we love seeing support for them, right? We love people that are visiting them, and like you say, taking the family or taking the kids and passing it on and letting them know why CSX Cobra is the way it is and how that's different from all the ones you see made out of fiberglass at the gas pumps. And all the details and history you can learn. I really love that stuff. So that's another one in Colorado there that I haven't been to. I feel they have a pretty good social media presence and I've been following them, but I've never been there and would love to. But the Peterson, we've worked closely with a BAT and held events there and done things with them. And that's a meaningful one for me as well. So I know we have the event coming up. Let's make sure we share the date for that. Cruiser Fest is September 11th of this year, a Saturday. I will be there. Greg, I assume you'll be there that day, and there'll be all sorts of interesting vehicles. I'm trying to overthink it as I tend to do and see if I can bring the right vehicle or show up with the right setup. But I think the stars of the show are going to be in the museum and some of the sort of visitor vehicles that show up that day. So I think people can kind of bring whatever they bring and expect to have a good time. Would you say?
I would. And I would just emphasize that it doesn't have to be a Land Cruiser. Cars are cool, whatever form they take, and everybody's welcome. We'd love to see your cruiser if you've got one, but if not, just come with what you've got and we'll have fun either way.
Yeah, I love that. That's fantastic. Well, yeah, so we've got it on the calendar, on the BAT calendar. I am super flattered that you invited me to chat a little bit about BAT with folks when we are there. That'll be a fun trip for me. I haven't been to Salt Lake in a little while. Need a trip back, and we get to see the museum. And so we're going to take some photos when we're there and certainly put a story up on BAT about our experience there. But the most important part is want people to know about the event, know about the museum, go to the website that Greg mentioned earlier. Tell us that URL again, Greg.
It's Land Cruiser HM for Heritage Museum, landcruiserhm.com.
Cool. Yeah, you got some good stuff and good info there along with the event. And yeah, I think that's all we've got for you, Greg, today. It was super fun to meet you at Laguna Seca. I knew you were there trolling around at our alumni gathering event that we had. Give us a couple tidbits of your experience out at the track or out at that weekend.
There's just no substitute for the atmosphere of a racetrack. The sound, the wind, the smell of racing fuel. And then there's just always so many cool people there, and it's so easy to strike up a conversation. And then you add to that all the cars and the transport, the pageantry of it. It's just a wonderful environment, and it was really cool to connect with you out there and see some of the cars over in your bullpen, and just wish I could spend more time at a racetrack environment.
Yeah, it was a ton of fun for us at that event, and having you drop by and say hello was a highlight for me. So I appreciate that. And I'm excited to connect again in a couple of weeks. Well, Greg Miller, thanks for your insights. I'm sure it's new and interesting info for a lot of folks that listen to the BAT podcast. And obviously the Land Cruiser category on BAT is the one I've got bookmarked and get all my alerts from. So people can check out what we've got going through the site there. And if you ever have any questions, fire them over to podcast@bringatrailer.com and we'll answer them. And Greg, maybe we'll have you back. Sounds like some other things are in the works in the future for the museum and other enterprises, and anything we can ever do for you guys or to help out the museum or the foundation, you can reach out.
Thanks, Randy, and thank you for all you do for the automotive community. You do great work, and it's an honor to be associated with you.
Cool. It's a lot of fun too. So we'll see you soon, and thanks everybody for listening.
Take care.